prophet Isaiah, the 2nd chapter, comes this passage. The word that Isaiah, son of Amos, saw concerning Judah and Jerusalem. In days to come, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established as the highest of the mountains, and shall be raised above the hills. All the nations shall stream to it. Many peoples shall come and say, Come, let us go up to the mountain of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may teach us his ways, and that we may walk in his paths. For out of Zion shall go forth instruction, and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. He shall judge between the nations, and shall arbitrate for many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war any more. O house of Jacob, come, let us walk in the light of the Lord. So is the reading of God's holy word.
Thanks be to God.
I invite us to pray. Gracious and everlasting God, you speak to us in a variety of forms. One of the ways in which you make yourself known to us is through the words of the prophets of old. In this case, the prophet Isaiah, from so many years ago. We ask that this ancient message would gain new freshness for us as we attempt to live the life you intend for us, and as we attempt to be vessels of peace in the world. Bless us as we ponder and attempt to embody this message. Amen. Something happened between the first and the second chapter of Isaiah. I got to figure God must have given Isaiah a stiff dose of feel-good or something, because things changed a lot. The same folks who were referred to in the first chapter as vipers and sinners and prostitutes are soon invited to come and walk in the light of the Lord in a mere chapter. So evidently, even a big-time prophet like Isaiah can't stay mad forever. But in all honesty, Isaiah had some good reasons to be out of sorts. He had what you might call the job from hell, because he was caught up as court prophet in a geopolitical nightmare in which his king was forging destructive alliances with other nations, rather than relying on the wisdom of God. What's a poor prophet to do? So you might say that the prophet was serving amidst the badly behaved. And so Isaiah faced a continuous uphill battle, trying to rein in the baser instincts of his people and his king. So that when it came to the whole carrot and stick thing, he had to be heavy on the stick. But today, in chapter 2, we encounter the carrot. The good news about a better time, a time of wisdom, faith, and peace. And that's very good news for all of us, because as anyone knows who's watched TV more than 5 minutes lately, it's really hard to live on a steady diet of bad news. It wreaks havoc with your digestion, blood pressure, sleep. So thanks be to God, there is this good news. And the good news is centered in this image of the mountain of the Lord, placed far above all the sleazy dramas of the power brokers, placed where the highest virtues of truth and light and peace hold sway. But there's a catch. You got to get there first. And that might mean some climbing to the mountain. I think it's significant to know that in Isaiah's prophecy, he doesn't invite people to the valley of the Lord. place you might be able to get to just by disengaging your parking brake and coasting. This place of blessing and goodness was a hike. In short, it took some work to get up to the Lord's mountain. Well, personally, I don't walk up mountains, but I do climb hills every so often. And that's tough enough for me. There's a road, country road near where I live called Oakley Road that heads steeply up west of where I live. And it gains considerable elevation as it intersects Gannett Hill. And while it gains elevation, I generally lose oxygen. But I figure it this way, if I can survive the first 7 minutes of the walk, I'm golden. The rest is literally downhill. And it really is worth the effort, because by the time I get up to the top of the hill, not only does the view get better, but my hearing gets better because I'm not huffing and puffing so loudly anymore. It's a lighthearted example, but I think in a lot of ways we have a pretty deep human impulse to head for the hills, to head for the high places. Psalm 121, which is really popular around here for Bristol folks, goes this way: I lift up my eyes to the hills, from whence does my help come? My help comes from the Lord. There's a sense that goodness and even holiness is found in the higher places. And so we're drawn there. Why else would so many cars sport that little sticker that says, this car has climbed Mount Washington? There's a sense of having been somewhere when we've been to the top. But again, it doesn't come easily. Closer to home, take a drive up to Ontario County Park and see how low you have to shift before you get up to the top, if you're driving a stick shift like me. You can burn through a good chunk of a tank of gas getting up there, especially if you happen to be towing a camper, which I don't with a Civic, but I've seen them go up there. Or if you want to get to the top of Bristol Mountain, you can burn through a good part of $60 for a ticket. But even so, for a variety of reasons, we love to reach the high places. I got to say, just as an aside, that ever since a teenager, when I was doing a lot of skiing out there, I got a chuckle out of Bristol Mountain's claim that it was the highest vertical drop between here and the Rockies. I mean, what's the competition? Ohio? What? 1,200 feet is 1,200 feet. Isaiah was calling the people and its leaders to a higher place of wisdom and faith and obedience. But the leaders of that time would have nothing of it. Nothing new there. In the United States, Washington, D.C. is considered to be the pinnacle of our national leadership. Believe it or not. The site of our highest courts and our most hallowed halls of government. But for all of their power and their prominence and their paychecks, I want to remind you all that all of you sitting right here today are much higher than any of the movers and shakers in D.C. because you, in fact, sit a good 650 feet above the top of the Washington Monument. Little old Bristol towers over our nation's capital, at least in terms of elevation, and maybe even in terms of revelation, to the extent that we look to a wisdom greater than ourselves. The defining characteristic of a mountaintop is that you're above it all, and that sometimes means the trees, too, above the tree line, which means there's no place to really hide at the summit. It's a fairly exposed and open and vulnerable place, about the way it is when we come before God in honesty and humility. But that's also our salvation. When we stand at the top and we let the wind of the Spirit blow away our pretense and our denial and our deceit and get honest with God. If we allow it, we can be swept clean and then prepared to head back down the mountain. Because as everybody knows, you generally don't live on the top. And we need to head back down the mountain. going to bring down from that mountaintop those gifts of clarity and compassion, commitment that are needed down in the lowlands. St. Francis put it this way regarding daily choices we make in life. How will this choice that I make affect the poor, the outsider, those on the edges of the community? Or another way to put it is, how will our actions flow down the mountain to the least and the last and the lost? How do our highest ideals translate into blessings for others? Or if you want to use Isaiah's language, how might we help turn swords into plowshares or spears into pruning hooks? Essentially retooling ourselves for God. And you thought there was nothing about recycling in the Bible. That's exactly what it is. Repurposing tools of war for peaceful ends. Yes, it means challenging how we allocate $1 million a minute that we spend on defense. But it also means reviewing how we personally allocate our money and our time and our energy. How do our decisions, yours and mine, bring greater peace to our neighbor, to our planet, to ourselves? Thomas Merton once wrote this. He said, instead of hating the people you think are war makers, hate the appetites and disorder in your own soul, which are the causes of war. If you love peace, then hate injustice, hate tyranny, hate greed, but hate these things in yourself, not in another. It's not about beating ourselves up, but it is about beating our swords into plows. Both implements have very sharp edges, but one lacerates and the other cultivates. Recycling our physical swords, but our emotional, mental swords too, for the sake of life. It's a choice. As Yogi Berra put it, when you see the fork in the road, take it. Take the fork that leads to the high place, the place of peace. As we draw closer and closer to Christmas, we celebrate Jesus coming down to earth, down here to dwell among us in order to bring us up. Ascend to the Lord's mountain, the prophet says, to a place of promise and peace. The goodness of God awaits us in those high places. And if you doubt me, I want you to consider this very simple fact. There are very few heated restrooms in our local parks. Ontario County Park, the highest park in the county, has one. It's a little thing, but when conditions are right, trust me, it can bring profound peace. Blessings await us in the high places. It's worth the climb.
Amen.